these rather exotic rituals for advanced Freemasonry.
Next to George Washington, Albert Pike is considered one of the most influential Masons of all time. After the anti-Masonic movement in the 1820s and 1830s, Albert Pike almost single-handedly rejuvenated the Masons. He revised and reorganized the Masonic rituals and laid out an overview of its core principles in his 1871 book, Morals and Dogma. As the head of the Scottish Rite in Washington, Pike's influence extended throughout the federal government.
He had an amazing network of people at his beck and call, I would say. He was very well connected to Capitol Hill. He was loved by many and feared by many at the same time.
These Masonic connections proved useful to Pike in the wake of a serious scandal. During the Civil War, Pike was accused of war crimes while serving as a brigadier general in the Confederate Army. But after the war, he was forgiven.
President Andrew Johnson granted him a full pardon in Washington, D.C. during a Masonic ritual ceremony.
Pike turned around and made Andrew Johnson a high-ranking Mason in the Scottish Rite.
The accusation is often made that it was because he was subservient to the Grand Commander that he granted the pardon to Pike.
There were other rumors. As Brown mentions in his book, the Masons have been accused of many alleged conspiracies. One involved Pike acting as a leader of an underground Southern secessionist group known as the Knights of the Golden Circle.
The idea of it was to oppose United States power and influence in North America by any means necessary, by overthrowing the government in 1860, by breaking up the country in the Civil War.
After the Civil War, other rumors linked Pike to an even more controversial group, the KKK.
These individuals basically, in my opinion, were the greatest fabricators I've ever read, and I get very disturbed thinking about them because they made claims like Pike was a member, a founding member, created the KKK. BS.
Attacks on Pike continued even after his death. Author Dan Brown touches upon this when one of his characters describes the Masons as devil worshippers. What the tale doesn't address is that in 1894, a disgruntled former Mason, writing under the pseudonym Leo Taxel, depicted Pike and the Scottish Rite Freemasons as being in league with the devil.
He found a young lady that said that she was like the harlot, the medium that the Masonic lodges were using in their diabolical sex orgies and black magic and black masses behind their closed doors. The Vatican bought into it and paid for it to be preached from the pulpit and in all the churches.
Taxel went so far as to claim Albert Pike believed that Lucifer is God. This was based on a quote from Pike's book Morals and Dogma, where Pike refers to Lucifer. Anti-Mason groups immediately seized on this as proof that Albert Pike was a Satanist.
They basically said that when he mentioned Lucifer, he was a devil worshiper. He was a satanic devil worshiper, the biggest of them all.
There were decrees written by the Pope at the time that specifically said he was a dangerous man.
Masons, however, claimed that Pike was using the name Lucifer in its original Latin, meaning the bearer of light.
He was not referring to Satan. He was referring to a star. He was referring to the star of Venus.
This is not devil worship or Satan worship. What they mean by this was the light, the enlightenment through logic, reason, and science.
Leo Taxel eventually recanted, saying he made up everything, but the damage had been done.
To this day, televangelists like Pat Robertson love to pull Pike out of their little bag of tools to show that Freemasonry is part of a world conspiracy and they really worship the devil.
Just as Pike was accused of controlling the Masons, the U.S. government has been suspected of being involved in mind control. In The Lost Symbol, Brown's fictional scientist discusses how military researchers have long explored ways to harness the powers of the mind. She mentions government programs involving ESP and remote viewing, a kind of telepathic mind travel. This is based on an actual military experiment in which a volunteer is asked to describe a location inside the Soviet Union. He is given only the geographical coordinates, but he produced a drawing that has some amazing similarities to the actual place, halfway around the world. It was all part of a secret military operation to use psychics to spy on the Soviets. This kind of research is still going on, and it plays a major role in the lost symbol. One of the book's principal characters is a scientist doing research into noetics. As the novel depicts, noetics relates to experiences that many of us have every day. That nagging feeling you get that something is not right, what we call intuition. That psychic connection that mothers seem to feel with their children. The power of prayer that seems to help a person heal. These all fall under the realm of noetic science. And the truth about noetic science is as strange as any fiction found in the lost symbol. Serious scientific study of so-called psychic phenomena began in the 1930s, when American parapsychologist J.B. Rhine began experimenting with ESP in a laboratory setting. Rhine had his test subjects try to predict which of 5 ESP cards would come up when pulled from a shuffled deck. Each deck had 25 cards, so anything better than 1 in 5 could be evidence of some ESP ability. Rhine reported some significant test results, but traditional psychologists and scientists dismissed his work, saying his methods were flawed. Rhine and other parapsychologists continued to work in relative obscurity until the Cold War. In 1971, 2 British writers revealed that scientists in the Soviet Union had been investigating using ESP as a weapon. As one of Brown's characters mentions, those in power always seek more power. One area they were particularly interested in was remote viewing, the ability to see a distant or unseen target using ESP. The Soviets were also looking into intention, the ability to affect a person, for good or bad, simply by staring at a photograph of the person. Once they got wind of what the Soviets were doing, the U.S. government rushed to set up their own program.
It began to accelerate a kind of psychic Cold War, where in fact, on one level, people were talking about missiles and missile silos, and on the other, you had a team of psychics who were asked to use these potential capacities to gain reliable intelligence information.
The American project was codenamed Stargate and was funded by the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency. The noetic scientist in the book draws connections between her own work and the CIA's Stargate.
Both the Soviets and the Americans were very interested in both the notion of mind over matter, the idea that consciousness can somehow influence matter.
The program lasted for over 20 years. At its peak, the Stargate project had as many as 14 labs researching remote viewing and got some results that seemed to indicate that remote viewing wasn't a myth.
And we know that there were cases where these remote viewers were able to make very accurate drawings of classified military sites on the other side of the planet.
Despite these promising results, some politicians and military brass objected to taxpayer money funding this kind of research. In 1995, the CIA terminated the $20 million project, but the military continued to use psychics to gather intelligence. During Desert Storm, remote viewers were brought on to help locate hidden Scud missiles, as well as stores of chemical and biological weapons. Today, the government claims it is no longer involved with psychic research. But the